So our fourth key insight is the insight of time as it pertains to grasses and to our environment. Time is particularly linked to the tool of grazing and the growth of our perennial grasses, which are the main form of grass that we need to manage in a farming environment or in a grazing environment. Perennial grasses are very important. They really do form the linchpin of the grasses in our pastures. Without our perennial grasses and without properly managing them, the whole thing will collapse. So to start off with a few definitions. So overgrazing, you might have heard that, but to give a definition, this is when a grass plant is grazed once and then is grazed again before it has had proper recovery. Overgrazing is thought to occur because of too many animals. This, however, is an incorrect paradigm, as we're about to find out with time. Overgrazing occurs when an animal either stays in the same spot for too long or comes back too soon. It doesn't matter how many there are. So let's use the example of donkey days. So to set the picture, a donkey is alone in a large paddock. It chooses to camp at the top of a hill as to avoid the mosquitoes in summer and to keep warm in winter. Every day, the donkey walks down to the creek to get a drink. On the way there and back, it takes a bite of grass plants on the way. After a few days of this, the grass plants begin to regrow, and the donkey takes another bite. This depletes the energy of the plant and weakens it. Once this happens more times than the plant can handle, it dies. The donkey does this every day for a year, resulting in more and more grass plants dying, further and further out from the trail. This paddock has had one donkey for 365 days, so that equates to 365 donkey days worth of grazing in that paddock. Okay, so there's been one donkey. It's gone back and forth from the creek, from where he camps to where he wants to have a drink. And along the way, he's taken bites of grass plants, perennial grass plants, every day. And so when they were taken down, when they were severely grazed, they'd throw up a little leaf and he'd come past and he'd take that. And he'd done that every day for 365 days. What happened was progressively moving out from that trail, more and more of the plants started dying because of the repetitive grazing before appropriate recovery. In the second example, the same paddock, starting from the same point, has 365 donkeys in it for a single day during the course of the year. On this day, the donkeys eat all the grass they can, severely grazing all the grass plants. The donkeys then, out of necessity, must move on or they die of starvation. This paddock, like the last one, has had 365 donkey days worth of grazing in it. However, because the donkeys have not been in the paddock for more than 24 hours, all of the grass plants are free to recover. Overgrazing is caused by time and not the number of animals. Okay, now if those 365 donkeys were to come back in weeks, let's say, there would be a lot of overgrazing because those grass plants would have only just thrown up, depending if it was the growing season, would have just thrown up a fresh leaf and the donkeys would have bitten it down again, resulting in damage to the plant. So here's an example of what happens when you graze a plant. Now, this isn't entirely accurate. There has been a lot of research into the grazing of plants where you can graze them repetitively without causing too much damage and without causing root death immediately. There is some science coming out now that in some species, the roots don't die back. In some of them, they do, and usually it's after a few times. So there's a lot of complexity in nature. This particular picture isn't a hard and fast rule, but it is good to have in mind and then apply it. So we can see in the top left, a mature plant is ready to be grazed. The animals has grazed the plant severely. With most leafy material gone, plant is unable to convert the sunlight energy it needs to grow. And day 5, thus, plant mobilizes energy from the crown and roots, killing off many roots. Day 10, leaves are beginning to grow on energy from crown and roots. If animals return now, plant would be overgrazed. Day 20, Leaves are now converting enough sunlight energy not only to grow, but to also re-establish roots. If animals return now, plant would be overgrazed. And then by day 40, the leaves have fully regrown and nearly all the roots have re-established. If animals return now, plants would not be overgrazed. Now, there is a few things here that I'd like to go into, specifically the days. It says day 5, day 10, day 20, day 40. This is not a hard and fast rule. We should be calculating our recovery off our most desired perennials. So, and it is dependent on where you are. It could be on the east coast of Australia, it's anywhere from 20 to 120 days. You can get places in the world where you may have to allow a grass plant to recover for up to 2 years. It is all depending on where you are. And so, as part of being a manager, one of your tasks is to determine the correct recovery rate for your particular desired perennials. And we can get into that on a later day, but I just wanted to cover that. Just because it says day 5, 10, 20, and so forth, don't immediately take that and apply it, because this is just an example. Also, as I said before, there's a lot more research now going into taking the energy from the roots and the crowns to regrow leaves. It's not as straightforward as, oh, we've grazed it down, now the roots are going to die. There's a lot more to it. There's root exudates. There's a whole broad branch of science that you can go into, particularly with what happens underneath a grass plant when you graze it. But in general, as a general perspective, this particular picture gives a good understanding to basically what is going on. But as I say, there's plenty more what goes on beneath the soil that we don't see, and there's some fantastic research going on in this field. But to give you an idea of recovery, here we can see a grass plant on the right-hand side, and if we see there's an equal time between the first third and the second 2/3 of growth on this grass plant. And so what that means is that if we adequately recover our plants, we get more bulk in an exponential way as compared to the time. So there's a fantastic book called Grass Productivity by Andre Voisin, which Alan Savory got his ideas of grazing from, or was a really foundational book for him. I would suggest getting it. It is a little bit expensive, and it is a fantastic read. And you can see this principle applied in Voisin's results. So you can have a look at what he researched with French pastures, and there's an equal amount of time between the first third and the second third here, but not being too specific, this is just general. So if we allow the growth of a plant to extend to its full recovery, we get a lot more yield off those plants. And so that's what's being shown here. And so this one gets a little bit more in depth. This particular matrix is more for when we do holistic planned grazing, but I thought it would be good to show it now. So we can see on the left-hand side, on the left-hand column, we've got the paddocks you have to choose from. So there's 8, 8, 31, 31, and 90. So 8 paddocks, 31 paddocks, and 90 paddocks. And then the days to recover. Okay, so remember how I said it's not just 5, 10, 20, and 40 days. It depends on where you are. So here we're going with 30 days of recovery, 90 days of recovery, 30 days of recovery, 90 days of recovery, and 90 days of recovery. Okay, and then we have days for grazing, so how long they're actually in those paddocks for. Okay, so it's 4, 13, 1, 3, and 1. And we see the 4 columns on the end split into a rapid growth and a slow growth season. So rapid growth would probably be during our growing season, height of the warm temperature, height of the rains. So yeah, everything's kicking along, everything's humming, everything's jumping out of the ground. And then we've got slow growth, which would be sort of your winter time. Okay. And so we're examining, so the grazing period for 8 paddocks for 4 days would be fair. Okay, there's not too much overgrazing. It's not too bad. 4 days in a paddock, that's fine. The recovery period of 30 days is fine. That's no problem. And in a slow growth so that's during the winter. So let's say it takes 60 to 90 days to recover. Our grazing period is fine with 4 days. We aren't going to overgraze anything. But if we come back too quickly, remember overgrazing occurs when we either stay too long or come back too soon. So if it's a 60 or 90 day recovery period in the slow growth and we've only allowed 30 days to recover, right, we're going to be in danger for that recovery period. So we're going to come back too soon, okay? In the second example, we still have the 8 paddocks, but we have 90 days of recovery and we have 13 days of grazing. So during the rapid growth season, so remember, height of summer, everything's jumping out of the ground, we're spending 13 days in one of our 8 paddocks. We're going to have a little bit of overgrazing, all right? So the regrowth is going to be regrazed and we're going to be damaging our perennials. Our recovery period of 90 days, however, is perfect during the rapid growth. We're not going to overgraze. I would argue that it is an overrest in that particular time. If we're having rapid growth, you might want to go through it twice or 3 times. But if we look over at the slow growth columns, so the grazing period of 13 days during slow growth, that's fine, no worries. And the recovery period of 19 days, the recovery period of 90 days is fine, that's good. We're not going to be overgrazing there. So we'll move on to the 2 paddocks of the properties with 31 paddocks. So if we've got 31 paddocks and 30 days of recovery, we've got a 1-day grazing period. So during rapid growth, no worries, that's fine. For our grazing period and recovery period, we're not staying too long and we're not coming back too soon. Our slow growth, on the other hand, so our grazing period is fine. 1 day, we're not going to be overgrazing anything, but our recovery is only 30 days. So if we're coming back within 30 days and we need somewhere between 60 and 90 days to effectively recover our perennial grass plants, we're going to be in danger of extreme overgrazing, as we can see here on this matrix, right? And then we can move on to the next example, which is still 31 paddocks, except it's a 90-day recovery, and our days grazing is 3. So during rapid growth, it's pretty fair, 3 days in a paddock. I wouldn't have any problem putting animals for 3 days in a paddock. I wouldn't fear overgrazing at all. And the recovery period's fine, 90 days, no worries. Same thing with the slow growth, it's all good, okay? And then final example, which is 90 paddocks with 90 days recovery with 1 day's grazing in each. So in both the rapid and the slow growth, we have good, good, and good, and good. They're all fine, okay? You see what happens when you add more paddocks? You get more ability to manage time. All these properties may be the same size. The 8, 31, 31, and 90, they all may be a 1,000-hectare property with essentially the same, they might be the exact same property. But when you change the amount of paddocks, you've changed fundamentally your ability to manage time. And that's very important, as we can see here from this matrix, to reduce the likelihood of overgrazing and reduce the stress in our perennial plants. So just to recap, holism is when we put our environmental, social, and economic views together, and we see everything as one. Where we change one little bit over here in the environment, the economy over here will also reflect back in those changes, because it is a soft system. It is one whole soft system. So that could be a farm, it could be a community organisation, it could be an NGO, it could be anything. But just realise that all these things are one, and the whole is what matters, not its individual parts. How does the whole react? Remember, like water, hydrogen will explode, oxygen will catch fire, and yet we put water on fire. It's because the whole acts differently. Brittleness. So we remember that there are parts of the world wherein humidity is guaranteed, and there is parts of the world where humidity is seasonal. And depending on these environments will depend how things shape up with the way that we use our tools and how our biology works throughout the year, and to whether anything breaks down by itself or requires animal impact in order to do it. Our predator-prey connection. So remember, our grasslands evolved specifically with grazing animals and their pack-hunting predators, all right? And remember, that was what caused the behavioural changes in the animal. So they bunch together, they dung and urinate, they severely graze without much deciding, oh, I want this good plant or I want this one because it's juicier. There's no time for that. We're eating what's in front of us, and then we're going to be moving on, okay? Whereas if we didn't have the predators, we have what we have in a set stocking environment where the animals can meander around, they can trail, they can repetitively walk back and forth and cause trailing, they can repetitively overgraze their plants, and they can dung and urinate sparsely over a large area of land. So the predator-prey connection is fundamental to the tool of animal impact and deals with the psychology of grazing animals. And as we just discussed then, time. Time is linked to the tool of grazing and the management of our perennial grasses. So there are 4 key insights: holism, brittleness, predator-prey connection, and time. And so just a quick reflection for yourself. How does this affect your management decisions now that you have a little grasp on these 4 key insights, which is by no means an exhaustive deep dive on them? How do you think that's going to affect your management decisions? How can you apply this to your local environment? Just remember, what is your local environment? Is it brittle? Is it non-brittle? Go out and see if you can find this out. If it's not apparent to you, just go out and have a look-see. So how do these concepts apply to your life? Are you a farm manager? Do you work for an NGO? Do you perhaps live in the big city? How are these paradigms going to affect how you live your life? Are you going to buy a regenerative product because now you know how it works somewhat? How's it going to affect you? And thinking, what is the whole that you are a part of? What is the whole that you are managing? If you were to put it, what is the society that I live in? What is the environment? What is the economic situation? And what is that whole that I exist in? And how does that work as a singular unit? And lastly, what is the brittleness where you are? I encourage you to go out and go have a look-see and just have a look. Anyway, thanks. I hope it was informative.